Nice.
Dude,
We
look
are
at this.
live, dude. This is
Look at
sick.
this. I feel like I'm in that scene from The Matrix where they find the weapons. You know, like, I need a gun.
I need to gun in all of the guns.
Yes.
They just fly hallways.
Yes.
We are
Let's do
officially, yeah, dude. We are officially live. Not in the Matrix, I don't think. Hopefully not. But we are live. The Collective Podcast.
Let's go.
Episode one of them. One of the numbers.
17,000
Yes.
or something like that.
Welcome everybody. It's so good to be with you guys. We are officially live, but we hope that this podcast can kind of serve you guys, serve as you search God's word for knowledge that you can take into your own lives and ministries, as well as hopefully just have some fun and talk about the Matrix. Whatever works.
Why
for you.
not?
But
Learn Kung Fu real quick.
yeah, dude, I'm with it. We're gonna teach Kung Fu on the next episode.
I wonder if I just need to know in the comments who's actually seen The Matrix. Like, hopefully it's required viewing, right?
100%. If you haven't seen the Matrix, then
Yeah, let's
you
go.
haven't
Come
seen
on.
anything.
Yeah. Have you even seen any movies? If you haven't seen The Matrix?
But maybe you're wondering who this young gentleman is next to me. He's from South Carolina, Colorado, South Carolina, and South Dakota all together at the same
I
time.
lived in all those places at the same time.
He's from all of them too. So
Yes,
parts of
I
it
was
he
actually
kind of
born in all four of those
formed
places.
together into
Yes.
one. Brandon Hare,
Oh, yeah.
everybody. He is with
Yes.
us, and we're so glad that he's with us. And Brandon, if you were watching Collective Live last Wednesday night, delivered a message on Moses and his faithfulness. So Brandon, do you want to give us a quick maybe recap rundown of what your message touched on and kind of just an overview of what that was in our new series?
Yeah. So our new series, it's called Zero to Hero. We're kind of just talking about ordinary people and how God can use ordinary people and to do amazing things. In fact, we say that God uses broken people to accomplish extraordinary things in His kingdom. And so, as we talked about Moses, Moses has this weird story that he actually goes kind of from zero to hero again, and it's like a roller coaster. Yeah. You know, he's born to Israelite parents. Pharaoh decides that the Israelites are getting too large in population, so he decides that he's just going to kill all the baby boys. Just throw them in the Nile River and sink before they swim, right? and so Moses is one of those Israelite boys that's condemned to die. You know, you don't get much more zero than that.
Yeah.
You know? And yet his mom decides she's going to put him in a basket, float him down the river, and hope for the best. And I guess, you know, it's the plan. It's up to
Hey, that is a plan.
But so she does, and man, Moses gets found by the Egyptian princess, pulled out of the river, and raised in the royal family. So man, we're at this hero point right there.
Yeah.
Finds out who he is, his lineage, kind of develops a heart for his people, and he's out one day watching these slave drivers just run his people ragged.
Yeah,
And he sees this one
down.
that's just beating on this Israelite man, and so he kills him, buries his body in the sand, and he eventually gets found out and has to flee the country. So he leaves the royal family and he becomes a shepherd. So back to the bottom.
Back to zero.
Yeah.
Real quick.
Yeah, and then so we find Moses later on in the book of Exodus actually, and he's shepherding, just, avoiding sheep poop basically and making sure that none of the sheep die. And he sees this burning bush, goes over, and turns out that's God talking to him from the bush, right?
Yeah.
And so we see Moses just chatting up this bush, and it's God telling him like, "Hey, I've got so much planned for you. I've got something incredible for you to do. I need you to go to Egypt. I need you to get my people and bring them to this promised land." And over and over and over, Moses is like, "I can't do it. I'm not the guy. I don't know. I don't speak well. I got a stutter." God just
I killed a guy.
Yeah, I killed a man in Egypt. You're asking me to go back to where I ran away from and say like, "Hey, I know that this is your entire labor force, but can we just go?
Please, pretty please."
You know? Yeah. And Pharaoh
Like, nah.
obviously is going to say yes to such an eloquent appeal, but God gives him all the. He basically says he's going to give him all he needs. He accomplishes, or he covers for all these excuses, right? He's like, "Well, I'll send your brother to speak on your behalf, or I'll turn your staff into a snake and use the force so that not only does Egypt let you go, but they also give you a whole bunch of gold and things to take with you." And Moses is still kind of like, I mean,
I don't know. It kind of sounds.
Yeah. And so God finally convinces him to go. Moses, through many chapters upon chapters of just conflict with Egypt and Pharaoh personally, they finally get to leave, and he leads them out of this slavery and towards the promised land.
Yeah.
And so as we were talking about this on Wednesday, the thing that I really leaned into, what we need to take away from it is that God's given us all something. You know, in the story of Moses, he had become a shepherd. This was his whole life. This was identity. It's who he was. And the only like benefit of the job, the only thing that he had with him, resources, if you will, was a staff. You know, and not a staff like people. Like he didn't have like a team. You know, a literal stick. We're talking about. That's all he had.
A piece of wood.
Yes. God's like, well, what do you have to offer? And he's like, I literally have a piece of wood that I found on the ground. And God's like, great, I'm going to use that, and that's all you're going to need.
Deal.
And so, I think that for us, the most important thing is we've all got something. You know? And God is saying that if you would just give it to him, that he can turn it into something beautiful and something powerful, and he can use it to accomplish the big things.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's a super, super good word. And man, I'm thankful that I was able to take something away from that and look at the things in my own life and even though things might seem small, like a stick or something tiny like that, like we can still use it, or God can still use us through that. Like that just shows how powerful he is. But what other than watching the Prince of Egypt,
right?
Kind of how can we take that story from Moses, the story of his life, the story of his leadership and his faith, and how can we apply that to our life in the 21st century, like almost 4,000 years later? That's an awesome story, but I bet a bunch of people might be hearing this and being like, okay, it's just a story. You know? How is it not just a story? How can we take that and run with it and kind of live it?
I think first of all, the important thing to note is like it's not just a story, like it really happened, you know. And
real.
It also, like for us, I think it can feel a little bit non-applicable, because I don't think that any of us have been called to like lead anybody out of slavery lately. You know what I mean? There's not like,
dude, especially after that many years of slavery.
There aren't too many baby boys being thrown into the rivers. You know? Especially in mass numbers like that. And so I think the thing for us to look at is one, I think we have to, in order to make this applicable for us, we have to look at more like the not so much what, but that what God is asking us to do. You know, like Moses had a specific purpose, and that purpose was to lead people out of Egypt. And we don't have that same purpose necessarily. 100%. Yet we are called to lead people out of slavery, and we are called to lead people out of darkness. And that slavery and that darkness is a result of the sin in our life. And so God has in fact called us to lead people out of that and into this promise of a relationship with him. It's
very, very comparable when you look at it like that. Like, the world isn't the same as it was then, but God is the same, right? And I've heard people ask the question all the time of like, well, the God of the Old Testament isn't the same God because they're so far different. And the reality is that that's just a false statement. God is consistent. He is the same God that is still leading people out of slavery. It's just not physical slavery under an emperor. You know, it's physical, it's emotional and spiritual slavery to the things in our life, like computers and what people say and how we view ourselves and these things. Like, God is still using us to break people out of that. And I mean, we heard an awesome message on Sunday from one of the guys on our teaching team, Jason, about being the good Samaritan to people like just living that out. Like, you might be the only person, you might be the only Jesus that a person is able to see. So like, how are you acting on that and leading people with what you got? Like, maybe it's your words, maybe it's your skill of painting or writing songs. Man, God is consistent, and that's super, super, super
good. I think that's really good. Just leaning into the consistency piece. I know that a lot of people, like you said, they look at God of the Old Testament versus God of the New Testament, and they're like, well, you know, he chose Israel and decided that everyone else should be wiped off the face of the planet through military conquest, right? Like, and it kind of looks like that if you read it at first, but what's funny is it's all like the story arc of the Old Testament, which is, if you haven't seen like our series, The Ark, that kind of talked about what the Bible is all about from start to finish, and go back and watch some of those because it kind of puts it all into context. But I think that it's funny because if you really look at what God was doing, like, he is consistent. You know, and it's like he chose the nation of Israel to be the vehicle for salvation for the rest of the world. You know, it wasn't like God chose Israel and no one else. God chose Israel to be his spokespeople, the mouthpiece of who he was, and to show them his love. And like, that love wasn't different then than it is now. Everyone had access to it. It was just that was the vehicle that he chose to introduce it into the world.
No doubt.
In as much as today, like, that's you and me. You know, that's everybody who calls themselves a Christ follower, like we're that chosen vehicle to bring salvation to the world.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, man. And I think one part of that's super cool that we can look at then, and we can look at now with the nation of Israel and us today. And the nation Israel literally means wrestled with God, wrestling with God. And so it wasn't like God chose these people and with puppet strings just controlled them to do his bidding perfectly. Like they messed up a lot.
For sure they did.
and even though we call ourselves Christians, we're not perfect. Like we're not puppets on a string that just do God's bidding perfectly every time. Like we wrestle with it and we struggle against it. And God every time picks us up and says, I got something better for you.
Yeah.
Like just trust me, have faith in me, let me use you. And that's super awesome. I hope that some of you guys in this chat, we can see you guys, we can see your comments. And so I can see Sean, Jacob Lilly. I hope that you're getting something out of this too, man. It's good to see you. I see your comment, and I see Caden and Shannon, you guys, the Fosters, you guys rock, and Braden, man. It's good to see you.
Yeah,
thank you guys so much for joining us in the chat. If you have questions, if we say something and you don't know what that means, type it in the chat, and we'd love to talk more about it. Like we're here for you guys, and we want to talk about the things that you want to hear about. And so feel free to type those in the chat, funny stuff, jokes, whatever, comments about the Bible, favorite verses, songs, anything you've been listening and reading, what God's been telling you. We're here for you guys, and we want to engage with you in that chat. So feel free. And if you're watching this in the future, I apologize.
Shoot us a comment. We'll try to respond to it.
Yeah, put it in the comments, and we'd love to come back to it in the next episode. Like, we're super blessed that we have the opportunity to, even though we're separated in this time with COVID-19, to still be able to engage online. And so thank you guys so much. We're going to move into kind of another little section on the life of Moses and kind of his story that is kind of like, it's hard to come to grips with at some time. So hopefully we can dive into this and reveal some stuff for you guys through God's word. But Moses, we know, wasn't allowed into the promised land.
Right.
God did not allow him to go into the land that he was leading this nation into. And we know that, one, Moses killed a guy. And in this story, from 0, he was a baby and was condemned to die. And then traveled down the river, was found by the highest of the high, 0, hero. He's back to 0, killed a guy. Back to hero, leading God's people. Like, it wasn't just those things. Moses, we see the story of Moses leading the people, and they're tired and they're thirsty, and God says, go speak to that rock and tell it to flow water out of it. And instead, Moses goes and he smacks it with his stick. God says, I want to use your stick, but he says, don't use your stick right here. Just go talk to the rock. But Moses smacks it with a stick, and water starts flowing. And then not only that, but it almost seems like in that story that Moses takes credit for it. Moses said, like, we're the reason that that's happening, and doesn't give God that credit. So, like, how can we come to grips with, or like how can we look at that story and Moses continuing to mess up and God not allowing him into the promised land? Like, how can we make sense out of that?
Yeah. No, that's good. So, I think you got to look at, again, the whole story of Moses, right? Like, and the whole story of like what it means to be a Christian and a Christ follower and somebody who wants to live and love like Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, we're not perfect. We're going to mess up on a regular basis. But what we hope for is that, like, today we're a little more like Jesus than we were yesterday.
Yeah.
Right? And tomorrow we're a little more like Jesus than we were today. And so if you look at that, like, if that's the call, right, like to continue to grow in Christ-likeness, if you will, for lack of a better word, if that's the goal, like, God's not expecting perfection, but he's expecting progress. Like, he's expecting us to continue on this journey towards being more and more like him. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you look at Moses' life, you see that he has this outburst of anger, and he kills an Egyptian man and buries him in the sand. And I think if you look at it, like, man, God had positioned him in such a great spot to be able to free his people from there. Right? He was a member of the royal family. Like, and in an outburst of anger, he threw that away. And God's like, you know what? It's fine. I got this. We're going to do it a little different. But you're going to go and you're going to do the thing. And so Moses is like, no, I'm not. And so again, we see like this, like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to do that, And so God finally gets him to go, and he does, works. God uses his power to get, Egypt to let him go. And so then we get out into the desert, and God gives the 10 Commandments. You know, Moses is up on the mountain for 40 days. God gives him the 10 Commandments. He comes down. He sees this party happening, right? Like the people have gone crazy, right? They've lost it. They're worshiping golden cattle. And what does he do? He takes the 10 Commandments that God himself had carved out of stone and throws them on the ground and smashes them. Yeah. You know, again, anger, outburst, just loses his temper. And something that God clearly orchestrated, Moses destroyed.
Yeah, just ruined it in the moment. Like,
and he should have been angry.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
You know, God was angry, but at the same time, like Moses just lashes out and smashes these sacred tablets.
Yeah.
He goes back up the mountain. God's like, all right, fine, we'll do it again, but this time you guys. So he's got to like hand carve these commandments. He brings them back down, gets the people back in line with what God's got, and then they move on. And then they get to this place called Meribah, and all these people are like losing their minds again. They're thirsty, they're hungry, they're angry, they want to go back to Egypt.
I want meat.
Yeah, they're at this point they're begging to go back to slavery because
so they can have food
because they're like, at least we can eat fish, and it's like fish is good and all, but like not like
how about living
let's work
not
15 hours a day. Yeah. So they're like, we would rather go back to Egypt, and God's like, oh, these people are driving me crazy. He's like, okay, Moses, go speak to the rock. And what does Moses do?
Smacks it
with smacks the stick. And again, we see this anger just flash in Moses' life, and this outburst happens again. And I think at that point, God is like, you know what? Like, this has been a challenge for you from the beginning. Yeah. And he's like, since I called you out, like, you've sacrificed your calling to your anger multiple times. Yeah. And God doesn't see that, like, there's not progress there. Moses hasn't grown. He hasn't surrendered that to God. He hasn't given it up. And so here we are with this guy who's trusted to lead the nation of Israel with this anger problem that he can't shake. Yeah. Man. And so God's like, I can't have you lead my people from a place of anger and from a place of bitterness. And so I'm going to have to find somebody else to raise up the next leader who can do that. And, you know, Moses did a great job of getting the people out and getting there. And actually, he did an incredible job of passing that leadership on to the next generation. And a lot of leaders can't say that these days. You know, a lot of us, even for myself, like if I look at my own leadership, there have been times in my life when I've like held very tightly to the things that are mine, you know, and I'm like, I don't want to give this up. I don't want to like pass this on. And I think Moses does an incredible job of handing that off to Joshua.
Just grace,
you know,
like abounds.
But he couldn't shake this anger thing. And God is like, I can't have my people be characterized by anger. Yeah. And so I'm going to have someone else. He's like, I love you. You're still my kid. Yeah. You know, I still accept you, but you can't lead my people. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And like, I think Moses' response to that is like, it just exemplifies the call that we have on our lives too, to have all of that kind of stripped away by God, but God still saying like, you're still mine. I still care about you. Yeah. And Moses graciously saying, I understand. Like I understand wholly, and I trust that God's plan is better than what I want. Because I bet Moses really wanted to get into that promised land. Yeah. He could have very easily like snuck into a suitcase or something. Right. You know? But he doesn't. He
actually up with the tabernacle.
Put me in the seat, you know, please. Yeah. But he trusts God and he lives that out, and it works out for his nation. And we see God throughout the rest of history, throughout the Old Testament, using Joshua, another awesome story of an awesome leader. Yeah. And we see the story of David and going from king to like messing up big time to being called a man after God's own heart. And we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego going from like where they were at to being with Jesus in a fire, like living out that calling. And Jonah, a story that kind of parallels Moses so much. Like, I don't want to do this thing, God. Yeah. I don't want to do that. But instead, like, we get to see Jonah live that out and go and preach the gospel. And we're going to continue these stories in our series, but Shannon Foster has an awesome question. She says, if you break any commandments, does God still forgive you? Like, that is the question.
Right, you know? Right.
Like, we see Moses breaking these commandments, like the commandments that God gives him. Yeah. Hands them to Moses.
Yeah,
says,
personally. Like,
here you go on a silver platter. I give them to you. I'm God. And Moses breaks them. Yeah. Right? So does God forgive Moses? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does God forgive us when we break those commandments? 100%. Yeah. Every time. God is consistent and says, I am the way, the truth, and life. If anybody comes to me, like I'm there for them.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing we can do that will separate God's love from us.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us today. Like, I think a lot of times we associate forgiveness with the lack of consequences, and that's not the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, and so for Moses, like, did God forgive him? Yes. Did God love him? Yes. Am I 100% confident that Moses is in heaven with God right now, laughing about that time that he hit the rock with a stick? You know, like,
Hey, Moses.
Moses, remember this one? He's like, can we stop playing that? You know,
yeah, I do
but
remember.
100%. But at the same time, he still didn't get to go to the promised land. He still didn't. So there's, you know, I don't want us to take this lightly. Like, I don't think that, you know, I think that a lot of times we could sacrifice major parts of our calling or major blessings from God because of our disobedience.
Yeah.
But at the same time, God still loves us, and God still cares for us. This is a very timely story. Like, yesterday, I was walking out of my upstairs to my downstairs, and my youngest daughter was sitting at the table, and she had my iPad, and I caught the light just right where I saw this hairline crack all the way across the screen, and I'm like, what happened? And of course, you know what they said, right? I don't know.
And then you hit her with a stick and water.
So I hit her with a stick. No. And so I finally got to the truth that Piper had dropped the iPad the day before and cracked the screen, and she knew it cracked, and she never told me. Was I mad? Absolutely. Like, I've only had it for like 5 months. And so what happens? They got in trouble, and actually, you can ask my wife if you need a character witness in this. I actually handled it really well. There was no yelling, but I basically said, like, I love you, and that was when they started crying, was when I told them how much I loved them. But at the same time, I'm like, you can't play with this anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I forgave her. I'm not mad at her anymore. She's out there laughing and joking outside right now,
phone.
playing with my phone, which is a bad decision on my part. But, you know, but the iPad, I took it away, and for her, like, I forgive her, and she knows that, and I love her, and she knows that. But there's still a consequence. Like, she doesn't get to play with the iPad.
Yeah.
At least for now. We'll see what happens. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so
hopefully she learns from that and moves forward, right?
Stops throwing my stuff.
Yeah, and God, we see in the Bible, like, that we can't just sin knowing that we'll be forgiven for it. Like, we shouldn't sin so that grace abounds. That's almost worse.
Right.
Like, we know that we're forgiven, and Caden asked, will God forgive you for everything or only some things? Like, so far as we know in the Bible, the only thing that's unforgivable is the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. And whenever that happens, like, there's no need to be forgiven because you don't believe you could be forgiven in the first place.
You're saying it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And so, Caden, in short, God forgives us for everything. I think if God is able to forgive Moses for his anger and for the things that he's done, and if God is able to forgive the man on the cross next to Jesus, if God is able to forgive these people that we see constantly throughout history mess up, then surely God is able to forgive us now for everything. And so I am super, super thankful that you guys have chose to be with us today. If you have any other things that you would like, feel free to watch this back and comment in the comments, write a question or anything that you would like, and we can touch on it next week. But we're getting close on time, and so we're going to have to wrap it up today. But next week, we're going to continue in this series called Zero to Hero, and we're going to be talking about the life of Paul. And so I won't be able to be here, but we're going to have somebody else here, and we're going to dive into the perseverance that Paul had to go through, the kind of just like being stoned multiple times, almost killed, like going to prison being multiple hungry, times, being hung, all of these
shipwrecked?
things.
Like, are we talking about being shipwrecked?
Dude, being shipwrecked, traveling the world, and all these terrible things happening, and still persevering through it. Even though before he was Paul, he killed Christians. Yeah. He literally sought out and breathed out hate against Christians. And so we're going to learn, and we're going to see God using a man that was probably the farthest on the opposite end of the spectrum for amazing things. And because of Paul, we see, well, not because of Paul, because of Jesus, because of Paul's efforts
through Paul,
we get to see the explosion of Christianity in that area.
You want to talk about somebody that gets forgiven for a lot of stuff? That's your answer right there. When you're asking about breaking commandments and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure that Paul checked all the boxes.
All of them, probably multiple times. Yeah. So we're gonna dive deeper into that next week, and we want to talk to you guys. We want to engage with you guys. So feel free to comment right now, and we'll see you next week. Monday at 3 p.m. on YouTube for the Collective Podcast. Thank you guys so much.
See you guys.
See you there.